Wow, the IDF is so incompetent that now they're killing their own soldiers. An Israeli tank fired upon 5 IDF soldiers, killing them. Several others were injured.
And the Israeli army says 5 of its soldiers were killed when they were mistakenly fired on by one of its tanks in northern Gaza. 2 shells were fired at paratroopers in Jabalia. These images show the aftermath of an Israeli strike in Jabalia. Israeli ground forces re-entered the area earlier this month. With more, here's our correspondent Dan Johnson in Jerusalem.
We know that 5 soldiers from the IDF lost their lives yesterday in the north of Gaza. This is in Jabalia, an area that the Israeli military has had to return to, having previously declared it cleared of Hamas fighters earlier in this conflict, around January.
You would think that they would use some kind of telescope or whatever device to see people from a distance and be like, oh, that's IDF soldiers. Let's not fire upon them with a tank. But they did it anyways, and that's just, in my opinion, that's pretty funny that the IDF is so incompetent that they're killing their own people now.
They completed military operations in that area but have had to go back there in the last few days, and that's raised a question over the sustainability of Israel's military strategy here, whether they are actually able to sustainably clear out Hamas for good. And that is something that is now playing out at the top of Israel.
This is like the United States going into Afghanistan and Iraq and other places where they're trying to bomb out terrorists. Like, you can't go into a nation, bomb everything, destroy everything, kill tons of innocent people, and then expect there to be no quote-unquote terrorists. There will always be people fighting against the Israeli government for murdering their family, their friends, for torturing their families and friends inside detention centers where there's been several IDF members who's speaking out against the torture by the IDF and the Israeli government. That is going to create resentment against the Israeli government, and people will want to fight against that. They want to fight against the oppression.
Israeli government. We have the defence minister, Yoav Gallant, challenging the prime minister to set out a clear plan for how Gaza will be governed once the military operation is over. And if I show you the front pages of some of the Israeli press this morning, you've got Yoav Gallant and Prime Minister Netanyahu there. The headline says, "This is no way to run a war." And on this paper, you've got a headline saying that a military government in Gaza would mean only blood and sacrifices without purpose. You've got the Jerusalem Post there saying Gallant slams Netanyahu indecisiveness on Gaza. And the defense minister...
Oh, it's wild that the defense minister is speaking out against the Israeli government and Netanyahu over him having plans whatsoever, besides just mass murder of Palestinians.
Minister said he'd been asking for these assurances repeatedly since October, but the Prime Minister had not been able to lay out any clear plan of how the Palestinian people in Gaza would be governed after the military operation concludes. There are questions about who will represent them, how will they rebuild their infrastructure, what will the role of the Israelis, other nations and international organisations be. Prime Minister Netanyahu's response to that challenge yesterday was just to say that his priority right now is to eradicate Hamas, and that he would not consider any sort of deal or power-sharing arrangement with the Palestinian Authority, who he considered to be supportive of terrorism. So that question remains.
Well, it looks like the 153 nations or so that recognize Palestine as a state will prefer the Palestinian Authority to run the state of Palestine. One of the conditions of turning Palestine into a state, or recognizing it as a state, is allowing the Palestinian Authority to take control over Gaza and removing Hamas.
Remains open. In the meantime, there is this division at the top of Israeli politics, which has now led to some in the government calling for the defence minister Yoav Gallant to be sacked from his role.
Yeah, interestingly though, another member of the war cabinet, Benny Gantz, in support of what Mr. Gallant was saying.
Yes.
So it looks like anytime you speak out against Bibi Netanyahu, you can get sacked from your position. That is pretty fascist if you're removed from your position just for speaking out against Bibi Netanyahu.
There has been support. He's been defended by Benny Gantz, others calling for him to go, saying that the defence minister failed on October the 7th, that he continued to fail, and that he should now be removed from his position. So the focus now is on how Benjamin Netanyahu responds to that. Will he keep Mr. Gallant in his position? He tried to sack him a year ago, before the October the 7th attacks, and there were mass street protests that erupted then that meant Mr. Gallant.
And there was also mass protests before October 7th against Netanyahu for his corruption and bribery charges. There are thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon hundreds of thousands of Israelis that don't want Bibi Netanyahu to be prime minister.
Was able to stay in his role. There's a suggestion here that his position in calling for a clear plan puts him in closer alignment with what the Americans want to see, and everyone seems to accept that once the military operation is over, Benjamin Netanyahu's future doesn't look like it can continue at the top of Israeli politics. So perhaps this is Mr. Gallant positioning himself with the Americans as a future prime minister, not just to conclude the war, but then to lay out